Well, Fred, thank you so much for making some time today to speak with me. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. You are someone whose opinion I value highly, and I have followed you and your writing and articles and books for a long time now. And for anyone who's watching this who doesn't have full context for who Fred Vallaeys is, you were one of the first 500 employees at Google and the very first AdWords evangelist back in the days when it was called AdWords and not Google Ads. And after that, you co-founded Optmyzr, which is a company with a software that here at StubGroup we've used for many years. It helps agencies and advertisers to more efficiently and effectively manage their campaigns on Google and other platforms. And you are also an author, which is the impetus for today's conversation. So back in, I think it was 2018, if I remember correctly, you came out with this book here, Digital Marketing in an AI World, which I actually absolutely ate up back in the day. We made required reading for all the StubGroup team members back then. And now you are back with a new book called Unlevel the Playing Field, the biggest mind shift in PPC history. So I'm really excited to dig in. And first question for you, Fred, is just what led you to write this book now? What do you see as a need for this new information?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, John. Really happy to be talking to all of your listeners about the new book, and thanks for being such a fan of the first one. But yeah, I mean, so that first book was really about the whole state of the industry and Google, primarily Google, but also Microsoft, just introducing automation after automation after automation. And a lot of us in the industry starting to ask the question, like, what's my role as a human? Like, what do I do? And so the whole theme of the first book was there's three roles that you can play. You can be the PPC pilot, the PPC doctor, and the PPC teacher. Now, I would go and give this presentation at conferences, and almost always the question that came out at the end was, well, fine, so me as a human, I'm like adding my skill set to this automated bidding from Google, for example. But aren't my competitors all doing the same thing? Right? Aren't we all using the same automations? And if that's the case, like, what sets me apart? Like, isn't this a struggle where the only winner is going to be Google, the creator of the automation? And so that made me think about, how do you unlevel the playing field? How do you make sure that as a PPC expert, a PPC agency, I mean, you've built up such a skill set. How do you make sure that you still beat the PPC novice who now has access to, frankly, quite amazing automations? But that automation is not everything, right? And so that's what this book is about. How do you level the playing field back in your favor when you actually really love doing PPC and do it for a living?
I love that. Yeah. And when you say biggest mind shift in PPC history, obviously that's a bold statement. What would you describe as is the mindset that people currently have in our industry, and to what do we need to change that mind shift? What is coming?
Exactly. Let me make that bold statement true. So, I mean, so I've been doing PPC since 1998 when it was on GoTo. And back in the day, there was so little automation that everything we had to do was by nature manual. So we had to choose keywords. We had to, not just a keyword, by the way, we had to choose every single misspelling of that keyword because broad match didn't exist. We had to put a bid for every single keyword. And that bid was a CPC bid because there was no CPA or ROAS start bidding. We had to write a single ad text for each of these things. So as an industry, I think we become so ingrained in doing managing every single detail inside that bubble that is Google Ads. And so we hold on to that, but all of this automation is fundamentally replacing these things inside the Google Ads universe that we are so used to doing. And so the mind shift is we have to stop doing these details and manage what I call at the periphery of the Google Ads system. So it's like, what are the inputs and outputs into that automation universe that help us be better? And so a simple example would be optimizing conversion data, right? I think too many advertisers are so focused on picking the right keyword that they forget that they haven't fully communicated to Google what they actually want to achieve with these keywords. And so they might say, well, okay, I'm a lead gen company, so I want people to fill out the form on my page. Sure, but is that really what you want? I mean, why do you want people to fill out the form? Is it because you want them to do something after that? Yes, exactly. That's exactly what you want. You want customers who pay you, not just leads. If you're selling stuff and you tell Google, my conversion is somebody checking out the shopping cart, Again, is that really where it ends for your company? No, you're probably looking to build a relationship with that consumer, have future sales to them. And by the way, if that consumer goes and returns 75% of what they just bought, were they as good of a customer as you initially indicated to Google they were? And this is a problem because all of this data, this conversion data that's incomplete, feeds into the universe of automations. And now smart bidding is basically looking at a signal that's not really the right signal and trying to get you more of that. So it gets you more horrible quality leads. It gets you more horrible quality customers because you haven't told Google what you actually cared about. And so that's the mind shift. We have to think about like what's at the edges of this automation bubble and how do we communicate into that so that we get better results when we do use automation.
I totally agree with that. And that's, that's something when new clients come on board here at StubGroup, we'll often see, yeah, they've got some kind of conversion tracking set up, or hey, they're maybe tracking form fills or leads or whatever. But that whole understanding of the big picture of tying in offline conversion tracking with that, of saying, okay, what's the average order value of customers and does that different per campaign, all those types of things. I think that, at least from what I've seen with automation, in some ways it's making us become smarter as marketers too, of realizing, hey, we have to understand this whole picture and make decisions in the accounts based upon it. Whereas in the past, sometimes we might kind of get a pass and say, oh yeah, it's driving leads, got a good cost per lead, cool, move on. And that doesn't work nowadays. What do you say to the agencies and the advertisers who are out there who say, I've tried automation before, it doesn't work, it wasted my money, it burned us, I don't think Google has my best interest in heart? Because I hear that kind of conversation all the time from our own clients and other agencies. How do you try to maybe reframe their perspective on where they need to be for success moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of elements to the answer of someone who's had a bad experience with automation in the past. The first thing I would say is like, listen, just look at technology. And this is because of Moore's law. Computing power doubles roughly every 18 months. And machine learning is heavily dependent. And machine learning, artificial intelligence, they're kind of like synonyms for the most part in the world of Google Ads. But all of this machine learning really needs a lot of computing power to find these unique signals. And so if you've been bitten by automation, say 2-3 years ago, well, we're at a stage again where computing power has doubled and Google is that much more able to find better signals. And if you talk to anyone who did automated bidding, say like 6 years ago, it was kind of hit and miss, right? Nowadays, it's pretty good. It, for the most part, knows what it needs to do. So just the time element, it might be worth trying it again. Now, be conservative about trying it. When I say try it, it doesn't mean put all your eggs in one basket, just like flip the switch and go with it. But it could mean take an existing campaign and set up an experiment and actually like get statistically valid data at the end of that process. And so, agencies are really good at this whole process piece, right? They know how to get you from point A to point B. That's really the first thing. And then the second thing, like we mentioned a bit before, but you have to think of automation as a new team member that you just hired. If you hire someone into your company, and it's a smart person because you have a high bar, but you don't tell that person what you're really trying to achieve, you give them incomplete information, you can't expect them to make every decision that you would have made, right? You have all the information, you know what you really care about. So you would have made different decisions than someone who has incomplete information. And automation is just like that. If you don't give it the complete picture, if you don't teach it, it can only do as good of a job as what you've allowed it to do with that limited data. So really think about it as a key member of your team, and don't hide anything. And so some of these advertisers who are skeptical about automation are also skeptical about Google. It's like, well, if I tell Google every piece of information about how much value I'm deriving from a sale, like the auctioneer now has all the information about like what's going on with me. I see why that's problematic, but at the same time, do remember this is an auction of you competing against fellow advertisers or competitor advertisers. And at the end of the day, Google can only charge you as much as is coming out of this, you bidding up somebody else based on what's happening in your business. So people do worry about that, but I do think you are simply going to see better results if you open the books a little bit more to the engines that run the automations. and I'm talking a lot here, so interject with a question, but the other thing that maybe we should talk about is actually called automation layering, because once you do open the books to the ad engines and let them do your bidding for you, you want to make sure that there's a control in place. And that's one of the big parts about this book is how do you control these really complex systems?
Yes, I would love to dig more into that. How do you, in terms of how you've written the book, how do you kind of break down those layering options?
Yeah, exactly. And so we call this automation layer because, again, the first book was about the humans need to help the machine in some way. What I also started to realize was it's extremely time consuming to manage all these automations, right? So if you're the PPC pilot and you're the one having these dashboards and making sure that the machine is looking at good inputs and outputs and making good decisions, that in and of itself can be a full-time job. Mm-hmm. Now, you could use a little automation of your own, or even something as simple as Google has these automated rules. So you can set up an automated rule that says, hey, even though I'm using target ROAS bidding, I would like to get an email if I start to see average cost per clicks exceeding, say, $30, because maybe the machine is kind of going off the rails a little bit too much. And you know what those boundaries for you should be. And that doesn't necessarily mean the machine is totally messing it up. It just means, hey, let's go and take a look and let's understand why it's going this direction. And so we call these automation layers. And so the basic premise of the whole thing is that Google invests millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in all this machine learning and making a really good ad system. You, me, other agencies, other software vendors, we can't compete against that. We can't make these investments, and we don't have the engineers, we don't have the money to do as good of a job as Google can. And by the way, even if we did, Google has more data, right? So, and data is a huge piece of the equation when it comes to machine learning working really well. So we can't compete against that, but we do want to keep these super amazing automations from Google in check. We can have simple automations like I just explained, and we call that automation layering. So we put an automation on top of the Google automation and it checks it, or it feeds it better data based on what we're seeing. And so through automation layers, you can really collaborate and have that human plus machine, which is better than the machine by itself. But instead of you, the human component of that equation being like 100% of your time, it's actually your smart strategies communicated into an automation that you control, which now works together with the Google automation.
So if I'm understanding correctly, in looking at those as layers, kind of that bottom layer could be something like, say, target return on ad spend bidding, where you're giving that automated goal to Google. And then the next layer up could be a human saying, okay, if like you said, if the cost per click rises above X, or hey, if the target return on ad spend, spikes in a given day or something and meets this criteria, send me a notification so that I know that that's a data point I need to look into and see what's going on. Is that essentially the layers?
That's exactly it. So it's a simple 2-layer system. You got your Google layer at the bottom and then your own layers on top. And the key point is that these layers that you control are very simple. You can do them with scripts within the Google Ads interface, or if you have the capacity, write a little API tool, or of course look at companies like Optmyzr. We can help you with that too.
Totally.
But these things don't have to be like the most sophisticated, brilliant thing. They're just keeping other things in check.
What are some examples of the most helpful types of these second layer optimizations that you've either used yourself or seen other people use to make performance improve?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. And so in the book, we break it down along the lines of bidding, targeting, and messaging. And there's plenty of examples in each one. But so when it comes to something like bidding, the one example in the book is if you sell car parts, you kind of know that you're probably going to sell a lot of car batteries right after it starts freezing overnight, because car batteries don't tend to like freezing temperatures. And so the next morning, your car doesn't start. Google, if you are using TROAS bidding for your car part shop, it's looking at a lot of factors about predicted conversion rates, but it may not know that the low temperatures are highly correlated with you selling a lot of car batteries those following days. And so communicate that, but how do you communicate that, right? Do you as a human now sit at your computer every day? Oh, what's the forecast for tomorrow? Oh, it's looking a little cold, so let me go into Google and manually set these new target return on ad spend. The automation here is build a little script that looks at the temperature, and if it notices a certain temperature or going below a temperature, then it updates your targets. And then once the temperature goes back up, it reduces your targets back to what they were before. So that's one easy way to inform the machine a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating example. And I know even using weather as an example, there's a lot of options that Google provides where you can, tie into weather APIs and see, across the country, what's happening in a way that, like you said, you can't scale that manually unless you hire 1,000 people to go check the weather everywhere every day. But automation can take care of that, in 10 seconds.
Exactly.
On the yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, no, sorry. On the creative side of things, creative is, I think, the area where it's most easy to understand that there needs to be manual input. We need to, create information. Okay, what are we communicating as an offer in the messaging? What types of images are we choosing, and so forth. But at the same time, Google has made great strides with things like responsive display ads, responsive search ads. Now with Performance Max campaigns coming out, where they are trying to do a lot of auto creation of ads and just leveraging those creative inputs. So I'm curious if you have a perspective, moving forward, how far do you see Google being able to go on the creative side of things and actually creating what is displayed as advertising to people? And to what extent do you still see humans needing to play a role in that?
Yeah, I think humans are still going to play a role in that for a long time. And it's just that human insight, right? So even with the car battery example, you could assume that Google looks at temperatures and battery sales, but you just don't know. You're not sure. So let's take control and at least inform them about that component. And it's the same with advertising. So with Performance Max campaigns, they can basically generate a video off of your existing video content that's out there. They can shorten it into the right sort of ad. But do you really want to give that level of control to them? Or do you just want to say, listen, I can take half an hour, actually do this and make a really cool video ad that I know my customers are going to, or my prospective customers are going to associate with. So there's a lot of control that you're going to continue to take. Now with responsive search ads, that's we did a big research piece at the end of Q4 of 2021 that we consistently find that advertisers who turn on responsive search ads tend to stick with it. So that tells us that the results are really, really good. Yeah. But here's another big Mindshift piece. So advertisers are very used to doing A/B testing of ads. And the way you do A/B testing is you basically say, I have two ads. I want to find the one that has the better conversion rate or the better conversions per impression. Because that's what I ultimately want. But the assumption within that analysis is that the number of impressions you will get from an ad group is static and is based on the targeting that you've done. So what keywords do you have in there? But that assumption has become false. And a lot of people don't realize this because responsive search ads are so good at recombining themselves into a way that they have a much higher ad rank and they qualify for way more ad auctions. So if you have an RSA and an ETA, static text stat, in the same ad group, the ETA is in fact limited in how many impressions they can get. But we see that the RSA in the same ad group can get 4 times as many impressions. And we've sliced and diced this many ways. So it's not just Google saying, hey, we love RSAs, therefore we're going to cut off ETAs. No, it's right. Actually RSAs qualify for more auctions. And you can look at the search terms reports and figure this out. And this could be another great automation layer, right? Figure out which queries are additional, incremental, and maybe put those in as new keywords so that you kind of guarantee that future traffic. But the big mind shift here is that you can't just do A/B testing the historical way because the assumption that impressions are static is no longer true. And so you have to redo your whole mechanism for A/B testing to take into account that one ad has way more impression capability. And so even if the RSA has a slightly less, say it has a 20% worse conversion rate, well, who cares? I'm getting 4 times as many impressions. Like that 20% means nothing in that context. I'm going to get so many more conversions from it. And so you got to focus on that. And again, that just means how you evaluate ads, which is very tedious, has to change. How you write your scripts that do this have to change.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. What we've seen here at StubGroup definitely bears that out in terms of our own client data. We see usually much higher traffic volume for those RSAs. Like you said, A/B testing in the ad world is just not, it's not A/B, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, depending on, the situation too, because you might have one ad variant that performs well for this type of person in this place in their user journey, and a different variant that performs in the same ad group differently for a different point in that journey. And if you just looked at them against each other, it looks like one's performing better or worse, but there are so many other variables that go into it beyond just that messaging.
Exactly. And that's where automation layering becomes really interesting again, right? Because now you say that you have these, what used to be a simple data table has now been segmented in so many ways. Just the RSA with the 15 headlines and the 4 descriptions, like how many permutations of that exist? Right. And then you had one keyword in that ad group, but now that one keyword has really shown for 100 different search terms. So you multiply this together and it's like this massive puzzle of what works in what context. And the more that you can start to understand what works well, you can take that back to the client and that can inform their strategy. They could have entirely new findings from this data, but doing that manually is just impossible. Right. But you could put an automation layer now sort of at the bottom end, so that generates these reports and finds these little nuggets for you to take back to your clients. So another one you can do.
Absolutely. Speaking of Performance Max campaigns I mentioned earlier, I'm curious if you have any perspective or if you see much data there. Something we've been trying for a number of months now for our clients, still kind of figuring out who does it work well for, who does it not work well, and the program itself is evolving, of course, but I'd love to get your perspective.
Well, Performance Max is super interesting because I think it is another one of these like leveling the playing field sort of scenarios. Yeah. Where you can now set up a single campaign type that basically runs across the 6 or 7 different Google channels, from shopping to discovery campaign, search, display. You got it. It's all there. I think sophisticated advertisers, the ones who tend to work with agencies, probably are going to make this an add-on solution. So they're still going to control their search campaign, their display campaign. They're even going to have a regular shopping campaign. That's fine. But then this Performance Max comes in. There's kind of an incrementality, right? The things that you haven't potentially thought about covering, it takes care of it. If you've been using smart shopping campaigns, then you're probably just going to transition to PMax and continue to use that level of automation and just take advantage of that. Now, as far as optimization, there's really 4 components that we see. So there's the creative, which splits down 2 ways into video and the ad assets. So those are things you can feed it to do better or worse. And then you got the conversion optimization. So that's what we talked about, where the better you tell it what you're actually trying to achieve, that's going to give you benefits as opposed to just like this intermediate conversion stage. And then the last one we see is audiences. So audiences are a big component of it. It will tell you what audiences are performing well, which aren't performing well. But now you could take that into account and start to, do a better job through Google Analytics, for example, to build up audiences or do customer match. But, the more audience data you give it, the more it can optimize. But it's a great example, again, of, everything inside the campaign itself, it's automated by Google. But what you feed it in at the periphery, right? So you're not setting bids, you're not choosing keywords, but you are telling it some of the high level things that it needs to be able to do a better job.
Absolutely. So kind of wrapping things up here, getting close to that. The 2 last questions for you, Fred, and really appreciate your time here. First is going back to that book, the digital marketing in the AI world. Are there any predictions you made in here, things you mentioned where you said, you know what, didn't quite come true, couldn't quite come true, or hey, the market changed in a way I wasn't expecting?
Well, and I think my failing in the first book was to put too much of the onus on humans and their time to work together with the machines. And that's why I want to write the second book. And the second book is an evolution from the first one. Mm-hmm. And then, books unfortunately take a long time to write. So by the time it's written, some things may have already changed. So in the second book, and even in the first book, so one of the truths of PPC marketing that I say is driving us towards more automation is that Google keeps taking away data from us. And I said they're going to continue to reduce how much search query data we get access to. And I've been proven right and then wrong and then right again. And it's like, I don't know which way Google's going to end up on this one.
The roller coaster.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I hope that the core principles of the book still hold. And, we live in a world where more and more stuff is automated, and the more that you can take advantage of that, because it is really good automation, but it does have shortcomings. And the more that we can fill in some of these gaps with very tactical advice, I think people can do really well.
Absolutely. So last question for you, Fred, the new book, Unlevel the Playing Field, where and when can people get that?
So you can get it on January 25th. It's going to be on Amazon, hardcover, softcover, Kindle version. The Kindle version is going to be on a limited time special. The first week, it's going to be discounted to 99 cents. After that, it goes back to its regular price. And then we are also recording the audiobook. So for people who prefer to listen, look for that by the summer. You'll be able to play it on Audible.
Fantastic. Well, anyone watching or listening to this conversation, I highly recommend that you pick up this book. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it as soon as possible. And Fred, really appreciate, again, all that you do just in our industry in general, with holding advertisers accountable, with explaining how Google thinks about things, with bringing your own unique expertise and perspectives. So really appreciate it and appreciate your time today.
Thank you, John.